admit all. So Michael, I'm going to have you in charge of admitting others as I start. I think we're at 6:40.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll keep an eye on that waiting room.
Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. How are you?
Let's see.
We are at week 2. Somehow the week goes by really fast when I'm teaching this class. It like blows me away how fast it is. And it seems like I have some amazing interested folks who are just joining right now, folks who are new to the class, as well as folks who are just interested in listening in. I wanted to share that last week we reached across the globe, not really, but we had viewers from all the way from Toronto. So it's pretty exciting, pretty cool that it's a colleague of mine who works at an agency in Toronto, and he's been tuning in. So I have to remember that they're actually East Coast time, so I think they will also be joining. But we have a really good capacity right now at 29 people. So let me get started because we do have 2 hours, and I want to make use of these really wonderful 2 hours of us being together. First off, I want to acknowledge the new students that are here. We did have 1 or 2 that had to be removed from drop the class essentially because I tend to give homework assignments for adults, and I think it's important to do homework assignments as we learn about transportation in our cities. But other folks have other commitments, and I'm glad that we have a really good cohort of students here. But I'd like to first give space, if we are in here, to 3 of the new students that have joined in. Could you unmute yourself as I call you? If I can bring you on, I am so sorry. And you can introduce yourself to the class. Angelia? Yes, Angelia, could you just kind of share about where you live, what district you live in, and why you're interested in this class?
I'm not, I guess I'm in Alphabet District. I just moved to Portland 2 weeks ago. So
Nice.
yeah, I think I'm in the Alphabet District. I'm still getting geographically acclimated. What brought me here is a job. I'm a transportation planner and have been for the last 12, 15 years. I came from the Bay Area, where I was actually just social distancing and teleworking there, but I'm originally from England and moved to the Pacific Northwest from New York City. And I'm interested in the class because I think it's in line with what I do, but also it's a selfish way for me to get acclimated and learn all things about Portland and particularly transportation projects happening in the city.
Awesome. Well, welcome to Portland and welcome to the class. May I ask you, who do you work for?
I work for a private company, WSP.
Okay. I'm familiar with them. I've worked with them. Awesome. Thank you. Welcome in many ways. Addie, could you unmute yourself and introduce yourself? I see that you're here.
I'm Ade, she, her, hers. I live in Mount Tabor neighborhood. I'm a user experience designer by trade. I currently work for a GIS company. I'm interested in this class because I think urban planning is a user experience design in a much larger and complex scale. I just kind of want to get a preview of it and see how it affects different aspects of life, specifically in the social and racial equity areas.
Okay. Awesome, thank you. And Carrie, could you unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the class?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Selwood. And wow, okay, wait, screen just changed. I live in Selwood. I have a PhD in oceanography, which you could be, well, why do you care about transportation? But I see a direct link between climate change and how we move around the world. And I am the chief of staff for State Representative Karin Power. So also when we think about, I'm really interested in the overlaps between state policy, local policy, metro, and where things influence and can affect how we get around both the metro area, but then how does statewide policy play into that as well?
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the class. So we did some extensive introductions last week. So unfortunately, as a three new students, you're not able to get the introductions from everybody, but it'd be great for you to review last week's class because we spent a good amount of time going through introductions. And so we do have a guest, and I see that Sam had turned off his video or turned his video back on, but I want to acknowledge Sam. I know I'm going to give you some time after the homework exercise and after some of the introduction from last week's homework, but I want to acknowledge that I got a really wonderful privilege of meeting Sam, our former mayor of Portland and a former director of the World Resources Institute, and ringing in 2020 actually, and here we are now. So I'm really honored. I'm very happy to bring Sam back to this class to speak. And Sam has spoken many, many years back when he was chief of staff for Mayor Vera Katz. So I'm happy to have Sam back, and I'm going to give him a good chunk of time. But what I want to do before we give Sam the floor, I really want to go through that homework assignment that I assigned, and I want to thank you everybody for doing that homework because it's a fun exercise, but it's also a really important exercise. And in this space, virtually, it's actually kind of cool to see some of the results. And I've always done it in my previous class. But Molly, could you advance to the next slide to see the results of our privilege wheel?
Yeah, just give me a moment.
Okay. Yeah, so the exercise, Sam, this is the third class that I've used it for, and it's really to look at where we are in the world, and with respect to who we are, and the rounder your wheel, the more privileged you are in life, essentially. But the more cracks and crevices and different things, and it makes you have to work harder. So there's a lot of questions regarding race, height, ethnicity. There's even a religion factor as well, of faith. And it's really interesting. I always roll this out at the beginning because it's interesting to see who your peers are and where you are in the world. And what we've been able to do is really to show this anonymously. Are you able to bring it up? Are you having a hard time, Molly?
It was on slide 2, right? It was just after.
It's on slide
was it-
2, 3, and 4. So it's after this slide. It's after the intro slide. Oh, you know what? Never mind. Here, let me do this because I think it's, sorry guys, it's always some sort of technical stuff. Let me share my screen. Because it's my latest PowerPoint that I sent you, not the one from yesterday. Let me share this screen. Okay. Can you see this? Kind of a slideshow, yes? Okay. Please let me know if you can see it. Yes.
Yeah,
this-
it's coming through.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. So this is the exercise that we did. And I'm really glad everybody participated in this. And like I said, if you look at where we are in the center, where you are above the space, it measures where you are in terms of class, so your education, where you are in your sex, male or female, your race, transphobia, your language, your Christian, your faith, your intellectualism. So it's just really interesting. I have done this exercise and I'm probably not very round, mainly because who I am. And I'll share, I went to engineering school as a Asian female and went to a Catholic university as a Buddhist. So, and I look really young for my age. So in any event, it's kind of interesting to see where we are in with respect to everybody else. But that's 8 of the results. This is the other set of results that came out. Feel free to chime in. This is actually your homework. I just love being able to share this because I think it's really important. It's hard, but it's also an exercise of privilege. This class is really important in terms of where we are with where we are in the world, especially now. And here's the last of the 4. So I'd like to hear some of the feedback from some of the students, if we can spend maybe just a few minutes to talk about what your thoughts were going through this. And kind of like your awareness in your placement in the world with respect to something like this visually and where we are now in the world. So I'll just give a little bit of time, maybe 8 minutes before Sam comes on to chat, if folks want to unmute themselves and just kind of share quick things. Or not, I'm cool with that too. You can always put it in the chat. I'm totally cool with that. So we do have sometimes a quiet bunch, but it's all good. Anyway, that is the privilege wheel. And
Okay, my comment, I'm new here, but I'm going to comment that I just love that everybody did it differently. I mean, in terms of, like, there's some that are very engineering oriented, filled out, and some that are very arty. And I think that's a thing in and of itself too, is how did you do your wheel?
yeah, very true. It's very different. Everybody interprets it differently. Yeah. Michael, do you have something you want to share?
Well, I was going to say, I know it can be a little intimidating to just kind of like, jump, jump out there and speak. So you also have the option to use the raise hand function. So if you are willing to share, that would be really excellent. And you can, we can kind of make a little cue or line by using that raise hand function. So you always have that option too.
Yeah.
And that is found in the participants button. There's the raise hand button there.
I could say something. I found that most of the spots were like very easy for me to see where on the line I would go. And then it was interesting for me to just notice which ones really made me pause and which ones made me pause for sort of internal reasons and which ones made me pause for thinking about, okay, am I thinking about this as far as how I am perceived externally versus how I perceive myself? And I found that I ended up going more with the external perceptions because that felt more relevant to thinking about that shape of the privilege.
To piggyback off of what Julie said, I think that I did it more internally than externally as far as I rated it. But I also had a difficult time about, like, I actually did it once, but while I was coloring in, I messed up. So I was like, I'm just going to do it again. But when I did it again, I put my dots in a little bit different of a spot than I did the previous time.
Very cool.
There's a message from Josh. Maybe he would like to speak.
I can't see any of the chat function because I'm sharing screen. Josh, would you like to say a few words?
Well, I was just saying that I scored pretty high all around, so I was gonna hold back and let others comment. But yeah, I did have some of a similar experience of how I thought I was perceived by other people versus, or what maybe factors have worked for or against me, sort of versus the absolute truth of the placement of the dot or whatever.
Very true.
This is a thing that, I'm sorry.
Oops, sorry. Did you want to say something, Julie, as a follow-up?
I think that was Mira. Go ahead, Mira.
Oh, sorry.
We'd love to hear from you.
Oh yeah, okay, sorry. I was gonna say, this is a thing that, like, it's kind of hard not to think about, like, where one kind of sits on all of these axes just generally in life, but I think it's another thing to kind of physically do it and see it. Like, I'm pretty aware of all of the ways in which I experience or don't experience privilege in different ways, but to see it is really different. And I feel like it's interesting because in a lot of ways, there are ways that I could kind of score myself lower on certain axes or whatever, but it doesn't always necessarily reflect how I feel like I live my life, which is, I think, particularly interesting because certainly these are all like very real and tangible ways of experiencing the world differently, and yet somehow you could just like not experience. I don't know. It could just like your experience can maybe not match the shape that you feel like your circle got filled out.
I like that. It's almost like the Myers-Briggs. Really, when you take that test, it depends on your mood, right? But different. This is very visual versus Myers-Briggs is very like internal. I see that Byron also had his hand up. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, my perception is that, I'm not that super privileged, but going through this, I realized that I have lived a life where the fact that I am a white male, European, English speaking, highly educated, it's just made my life so much easier than anyone else. And I've come to realize in the last few years how much that people that aren't white males actually suffer underneath all of this. And although that isn't how I think of other people, and that's not my viewpoint on other people, it is true that that's what people think.
That's what happened when you have an Amazon delivery and a dog on your lap. Okay. Thank you so much, Byron. This is what happens in class and virtually when you're all at home. But no, I recognize that. I think it's very, very important. But now that we are guarded with this kind of information, I think one of the things to speculate on and think about is where do we go from here? Now that we have this awareness about us. And the whole world, I think like so much of our world is waking up. And this is just another good example of where we are, but how do we plan for things like this? I mean, this is a transportation class. Let's get back to the class. The class is a transportation class, which has also been morphed into land use, as important as housing, as important as climate change. And there's a political space that's also as important. So let me stop sharing the screen. But which leads me then to Sam. I invited Sam to come back to this class, which is way before my time when you came here and spoke. But I really love to give you the floor, Sam, and talk about your career trajectory, your time in Portland, your time away from Portland, and also your return back. I'm really excited to have you back in Portland as well as this class. So I'm gonna hand it back. I'm gonna hand it over to you, Sam.
Well, thank you. And it is good to be back. I was also back when I was a commissioner and as mayor once as well. So I enjoyed coming back because I like the discussion. And so I'm going to be really brief in my introductory or beginning remarks, and then hopefully be thinking of those tough questions on any topic related to cities. but my
I think his internet has paused.
It
Let
cut
me
out for
text
me
him.
too. Okay.
Okay, yeah, let me text Sam.
you can't hear
there he
me?
is, he's back. Yeah, you're back.
Oh,
You
Sam, you're
paused a
back
bit.
now.
Okay. Did you catch any of that? It was awesome.
Oh God,
No.
help me, Michael.
All right. I'll get closer, speak louder. Maybe that'll take over more bandwidth. I don't know. So I grew up in Newport, Oregon, and I became interested in transportation because family of modest means, we had one car, and my mom commuted to Lynn Benton Community College to get her GED and eventually go.
Oh, we lost you again, Sam.
Hmm. Let me text him. Stand by. This happens. Oh, he's adding. Okay, bring. There you go.
This is my. Just a second. So this is my phone. Hopefully that, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. My interest in transportation probably started when I grew up in Newport, Oregon as a kid, and we had one car, family of modest means, and my mom used that car to commute on a daily basis to first get her GED, and then at Lynn Benton Community College, and then go on and get a college degree. And that left us to make do with biking and walking and bumming rides from, friends' parents. And we didn't have a transit system in Newport, and we didn't have a railroad in Newport. So I would always see those things in big city. I delivered newspapers for the Oregonian growing up, and so I also read every paper, and that's probably how I got interested in public service and why I always wanted to move to Portland, the big city. When I was 18, I finally got the opportunity to visit Portland, and was, such a big city. How does it all work? And was fascinated literally about how people get around. Of course, I had been reading the newspaper, and I had been following the fights over freeways. A number of freeways were proposed for Portland that thankfully never got built. One of the citizen advocates to fight that, and there were a number, was Vera Katz from Northwest Portland. So I remember her name from her days as an advocate against freeways, and I always thought she was so smart. My family eventually moved to Eugene, where we lived then, and my parents got divorced. So my mom had 4 teenagers. What a nightmare. Moved us into public subsidized housing, where we got a free bus pass on Lane Transit District, and just rode the heck out of the buses. It was free. I mean, wow, this is awesome. So I got to explore the city. It allowed me to get a job at a really young age. And we lived right beside South Eugene High School, where I got an internship with Peter DeFazio, who was a Lane County commissioner at the time. And this is relevant to the class. I was an intern for him. He had me do transportation issues for the county as an intern, as much as an intern could do. He ran for Congress and asked me to be his communications director, which I did. And he won and got on the transportation committee. I stayed in the district in Eugene, but worked on constituent issues and communications issues focused on transportation. So I got another sort of view, not just my own experience, but all these complaints coming in the Eugene Springfield 4th Congressional District, which goes all the way to the California border at that time, Roseburg, Coos Bay, Curry County. So I got another sort of dose of what it means to a lot of complaints about, bad roads, incomplete streets, dangerous places. Why doesn't transit serve my district or serve my city? Why isn't there transit in my city? In places in small towns, but medium-sized towns like Roseburg. I then went on to work, after working for him for a number of years, I then went on and worked for the Oregon House of Representatives, where Vera Katz was the Speaker at the House at that time. And I got to know her there. And when she decided, worked there for a couple of years, and then she decided to run for the Portland office of mayor and asked me to be her campaign manager. And then we won against another transportation icon, Earl Blumenauer, who was on the council, stayed on the council, and then served as her chief of staff for almost 12 years. I ran for city council explicitly to be the transportation commissioner. And that wasn't a hard ask because no one else wanted to be transportation commissioner. It was the #2 source of complaints in the city, and on many times of the year was the #1 source of complaints in the city. For the same kinds of complaints I got when I worked for Peter DeFazio when he was in Congress, but a lot more, and a lot more excruciatingly difficult complaints. And I wanted to be transportation commissioner with all due respect, and please forgive those of you like your professor who are engineers, because I didn't feel like the tradition of thinking about transportation, which had really come from a very privileged, antecedents, but then in more recent times, and appropriately so to a degree, but I thought way overblown, really thought of in civil engineering and spatial planning, even land use planning. I felt like while we were pioneers in transportation and land use planning, that it had almost become a fetish, that we had forgotten about the humble place that important but humble place transportation, transit, everything that goes with it should have in local society, and that is to make more important goals happen for the individual and for the community. And I really felt that at that time, Portland had gotten a little too full of itself and had, without malice, but it just sort of crept its way into this sort of spatial engineering, and it had lost this sense of purpose to help people reach their potential. In fact, the planning around transportation for the city of Portland was done in a silo too often. Massive transportation projects would happen and there would be no meaningful discussions with schools, no meaningful discussions with the other 5 transportation providers in the city of Portland. And this wasn't just my sort of view, and then I'll stop here. It wasn't just my view on transportation. It was my view on what my philosophy is about government and governance. And that is you sort of figure things out from where your people are at. And those are people who live here, people who work here but don't live here, people who own businesses here, and people who are just visiting. And you'll work your way backwards on what do you need to do as a government to help them realize their potential for life, work, happiness. And so that's what we did with the Portland Plan. And the Portland Plan is one of the rare strategic one of the rare non-land use strategic plans of any city in the United States. And council passed that in 2012. It's on the basis of that then the comprehensive plan and the plans around 2035 are done. And I really felt, it was a 1.0 effort. So I look back now and, see how we need to and could have improved it. And it needs to be re-upped. But it allowed, the purpose of it was to get us focused on, all right, this is where our people are at. This is where a whole bunch of Portlanders had a really good life and a whole bunch of Portlanders didn't have access to that good life. And that was one of the basis, along with sustainability, of the Portland Plan. And it was very healthy for transportation because it wasn't just a plan that was done by city government. We actually involved all 26 layers of government that do work in the 146 square miles that is the city of Portland. It's probably now $13 billion in government spending by 26 different sort of layers of government. And I was still transportation commissioner as mayor, and we would every year, twice a year, we would gather all the transportation providers in the city of Portland, which helped put together the transportation component of the Portland Plan. And especially around budget time, we would go through that and we would coordinate our efforts around budgeting, around enforcement, around safety. All right. What questions or comments do you have?
Thank you for sharing, Sam.
Yeah, you
Thank
bet.
you for sharing, giving us like a really great overview of your career and also where we've been within the city of Portland and how we arrived to where we're at.
Well, I can be provocative. I think we need to rethink.
Oh, I know you do.
Once again, I think we need to rethink transportation. We tend to, even beyond anything that we've tried before. So I hope you'll present some ideas. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah. So I have Quincy who has his hand up. Quincy, shoot away. You have a question for Sam?
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate the presentation. Sorry, my video is not working right now.
That's all right.
My question has to do with emergency management planning and how different traffic changes can happen within cities when they enter emergency management, and kind of what your experience has been in Portland as mayor and then in other cities with regards to traffic changes and emergency management situations.
Yeah, in emergency situations, which as you all know in Portland is usually around, in terms of its frequency, is inclement weather, and especially around snow and ice. And the challenges around, as a leader, providing the kind of visible leadership to your constituents, and knowing that your television broadcast, your radio broadcast, your online broadcast is going to be viewed by the region at a minimum, and they're going to take what you have to say as potentially applying to them. So that's one of the mismatches that is a challenge. The other challenge is Portlanders, when there's a snowflake, they hit the road, literally. And, you know, traffic, inclement weather, traffic jams are awful, deadly, dangerous. So we created city alerts, taking advantage of Twitter, and people can sign up for texts. Before there was the emergency broadcast system on your phones now, we had sort of a nascent effort at that. We also were willing to, I was more willing to break into broadcast television, especially for anything where someone's life could be at risk because they're stranded in gridlock on one of the freeways. And it's the freeways and the gridlock that goes with them with inclement weather. But we also spent, so that's the inclement weather, but we also spent time sort of going back over old assumptions about where city emergency response supplies, equipment were located, not only city equipment, but our partners, the county. So for example, on Portland's west side, there was no emergency staging area. There was no place on the west side where we would regularly park our vehicles that would be needed in an emergency, almost as and I'm going to lean into the transportation aspect of this, of emergencies. But they were under the Fremont Bridge on and off ramps, which isn't the oldest bridge in the city of Portland, but you're counting on much of the fleet to get smashed and a lot of people to be hurt or injured that might be at that spot. So it was a fight to get council to spend the money to provide for a daily staging area on the west side. And the neighbors in that location, I understand, didn't like it much, but it was zoned for industrial. And we did that. And then we went on to create neighborhood hubs and beacons, about 92 of them around the city, which were pre-stocked with communications equipment. And that was important because in an earthquake, which is just a matter of time, the ability to get around again is going to be really limited. Even if all the buildings stand up, there's going to be a number of these overpasses that people don't think about. The 84 bridge structures in the city. We tend to think of the bridges over the river, but there are a lot of seismically deficient overpasses and underpasses in the city, which cuts off sections of the city. And so those beacons, being able to get on the ground, not assuming that a police car or fire emergency apparatus or a transportation vehicle is going to make its way all the way across the city from where it happens to be staged, in the lower Albina area. We really tried to sort of think that through and change the assumptions about our ability to get around the city. And if we couldn't stage vehicles there necessarily, because you can't spread them out too much, we could at least pre-stage communications and equipment in places around the city where people could give us real-time information about the status of that part of town and better be able to triage where we should place our efforts.
That's a good
Awesome. Thank you
answer.
so much.
Sam doesn't know this, but I'm actually working on our region's, updating our region's emergency transportation routes. But
Good for you.
And RDPO as a project of mine. So that'll be rolling out. Actually, I can send you that information on where we are right now. But it's interesting and it's hard. It's really hard.
It really is hard. I hope they're paying you a lot of money. That's really hard. Nobody likes to have their street the emergency evacuation route because your car gets towed,
Right. And I'm helping define which one it is. So yeah, maybe you can help vouch for me.
Yeah, happy to help.
Okay, so thank you. It's planning for emergency and cascading has always been a big, like important thing. You know, earthquake engineering is a big thing. My brain is not that smart to figure all the calculations, but I'm really good at community and people and bringing people together. So, so I don't remember the order, but I'm gonna take Riley's question right now. Riley's hand is up.
Hi, thanks.
Hi, Riley.
Hi, thanks so much for coming today. I was just curious, I haven't lived in Portland very long, and I was wondering what the transit part of the Portland plan is.
Mm-hmm. So key to, again, taking this sort of people status approach is we really worked hard at determining what were transit deserts and not transit deserts, where in the city was there potentially over service of transit. And then there was also working with TriMet and the streetcar and ODOT looking at the most dangerous places, because every transit trip starts as a bike or a pedestrian trip. So really looking at the station area safety issues. And there are a lot more transit deserts in Portland and worse in the region, as this group probably knows than most other people are aware of. And it's so that's what we looked at, is the safety, the availability, and then the relative cost. So even if it's a transit served neighborhood, is the economic security of that neighborhood so low that $5 a day is a big lift, 5 days a week. And we didn't get very far with TriMet, but a low income pass is what I was pushing them on. And I finally I compromised and went with free transit passes for all high school students in the 5 school districts in the city of Portland, knowing how important it was to me when we moved to Eugene, and I was in high school then and got a transit pass, and how much it lit up my own life in terms of recreation and friends, but being able to work. So those are some of the things. I think now with the advent of ride on demand like Uber and Lyft, and the fact that buses all over the world are getting stuck in congestion, just like everything else, that more grade separated transit only lanes, even if it's for just certain peak times, is I think sort of the next iteration that we need to go. I also think, and this is sacrilegious to say, but for those areas that are not served by transit, getting some sort of pass system, but and don't necessarily work don't necessarily work regular hours. I think some sort of voucher system on the Ubers and Lyft pool rides has got to supplement people's lives in transit deserts. And sort of the shrugging our shoulders and what I just said is considered sacrilegious in sort of the transit community. But I think we're way too fixated in transit, we're way too fixated on equipment and not focused enough on how do we get the people who have a hard time paying for getting around. How do we help them? And if those are vouchers, if it's something else, I think we need to do that. But scooters, for example, are a hot button issue. Scooters have eaten into bike trips. I think we've got a lot of things that we need to think about, like we're doing now. The cities and every city in the world's basic system was put together before, obviously, any of this. but we really haven't sort of thought through about, you know, the closest that I feel like my team and I came was we created the 20-minute complete neighborhood, where in Portland, 2/3 of all automobile trips are not about getting to or from work. They're about everything else. So if we could take a big chunk out of those 2/3 of all automobile trips by helping to develop complete neighborhoods. So if you wanted to go somewhere else to get your groceries or entertainment or everything else, fine, but you weren't forced to. That within a 20-minute walk, you could get what you needed at a price that you thought was fair. And this is where, you know, and in order to sort of begin to try to make that a reality, is we employed behavioral scientists to do that. Like, I can say all I want about, you know, what I think it's going to, you know, take to get someone to say, I'm not going to go to Costco, I'm going to go to the local store. You know, I can think all I want, but until we have sort of those consumer experts and behavior scientists, it was just, you know, transportation expert wannabes like me and engineers and a lot of people who had passions about modes just talking at each other. And it made a huge difference. You know, when we, when we worked on Lentz Town Center, for example, and, you know, one of the things that, and we surveyed people in Lentz in a sort of scientific survey about where they were spending their money. They were driving really far away to try to save some money because their incomes were under pressure. So we knew that, you know, a New Seasons or a Whole Foods in Lentz was not going to meet their needs. They would continue to feel like they had to drive or something else. So it was that kind of sort of thinking through that I think transportation planning and operations and transit are at their best when they think like that.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for the question.
That's awesome. I just realized some of my projects have also always intersected with some of the pathways that Sam had made at the beginning when he was in office. And all of a sudden I'm like, working on Lentz projects. I'm like, that was really your project, really.
Yeah.
So we do have a few more questions on hand raise and also from the chat function. So what I'm gonna do is take the hand raise because I believe they came first. But I can alternate between the two because I think they're really, really important questions that I'd love for you to address. So Julie, I'd like you to go next.
Okay, I'll try to be fast. I am curious about the complaints that I'm imagining you received when you were doing transportation and, excuse me, sort of what you found to be the best ways to engage with people, to remove planning from silos, and how you work with both the brilliant ideas from the engineers and also the very real lived experiences of folks living in neighborhoods.
Thanks for that question. That's a great question. A lot of it was, you know, it was things like 122nd, 82nd Avenue, and West Burnside. Complaints about how unsafe it was and the data to back them up. Lots and lots of questions and concerns that speeding traffic, which is safety, near misses, which is safety, car crashes, you know, that don't necessarily get reported, lack of, I don't want to cross my street. 122nd and 82nd Avenue are great examples. West Burnside is great examples. And one of the other reasons why the sort of that people-focused transportation was, I just thought that the city had lost its way on safety. And I feel like, in honesty, it's kind of lost its way again on safety. My eyes were opened when a woman came to the mayor's office when I was working for Vera from Linton, the Linton neighborhood, which is on the Willamette sort of outer northwest. And that's a state freeway that runs through Linton. And she brought in, Vera wasn't there. She came in, met with her, and she said that someone's going to get killed. You know, our kids have to cross the street to get the school bus, and the traffic is speeding up. And so I wanted to know, you know, I didn't have the time necessarily. And Vera was like, "You're taking on a specific constituent complaint?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I want to learn what this is like." And I found ODOT to be horrible, absolutely horrible around safety issues. And so I got the city to go clock the speeding, even though it wasn't in our jurisdiction. I had the city safety planners come up with some ideas so it would be experts at PBOT talking to experts at ODOT for cost-effective safety things that could be done. Sat down with these three moms, they were called, and ODOT, and they basically said it's a highway. I might have said freeway. It's a highway, kind of looks like a freeway, and we'll think about it. And the mom said, you know, someone's going to get killed. 2 weeks after that meeting, a kid was killed crossing the street on a school bus. And for me, that was just the end of it, the end of bureaucracy. It was a key reason why, with Vera's retirement, I wanted to work on transportation for the city. And so we came up with the 25 most dangerous places in the city every year. And we made sure that it was divided out in the city. So every neighborhood got some attention, and we went at it. And I would get the port to pay for stuff. I would get ODOT to pay for improvements on 82nd Avenue and other highways in the city. And they were actually thrilled to do it. They had never really felt like, besides reading complaints, that they had never been able to sit down and figure out with us how to make things better. Good example is the Mac stop on 82nd Avenue is one of the most dangerous places in the city for pedestrians, because people would cross 82nd Avenue between the two Mac stops. One is on one side of 82nd Avenue and one is on the other side of 82nd Avenue. So if you ride by that now or walk by that now, or if you're on a car, you'll see that there's a big barrier in the middle of the street. Boy, did the neighborhood get mad at us for that. And it went from one of the dangerous places in the city to one of the least dangerous places in the city. We just went at that top 25 most dangerous places. They weren't always intersections. They weren't. We did, in honesty, lean into the vulnerable road users, and you know that helped reduce constituent complaints. But I feel like the city, and I'm sure everyone who leaves office says this, so take it with a grain of salt, but I just feel like the city stopped doing transportation safety summits. They stopped doing top 25 dangerous places around the city. And I think that is not the only reason why, like, biking is down. There are a lot of other reasons, but biking is down when we should be, with the increased congestion, we should be ramping up safety efforts. So I hope that helps illuminate a little bit about how the approach that I took. Safety was the number one. And I quit automatically repaving secondary neighborhood streets because we had to cut the budget because revenues were going way down. And we would go out and do pothole fillings, and we would go out and do repairs, but this like automatic grinding and repaving of quiet neighborhood streets, we put into safety. It was very controversial. The Oregonian newspaper had a couple of coronaries over it, but I wish I could have done both, but I had to make a decision, and I made a decision to save lives.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I was thinking a lot more about things on the front end planning side, because I feel like that's where I hear the big complaints and blowups. And so it's really great for me to be thinking as well about when things are already built and need to be fixed.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to take a question from the chat room. Michael posed a question, and we'll just read it out to you, Sam. What would you say are the main dissatisfactions with transportation that you have had to field that remain relevant today?
Mm.
Did I read that right, Michael? That you had to, anyway.
So the biggest complaints that haven't been fixed.
Yes, essentially.
Um,
We need a translator.
Well, congestion has gotten a lot worse. It was a challenge when I was the 8 years I was transportation commissioner. And the approach to that was that a lot of the top 25 most dangerous places on the system that within the boundaries of the city of Portland usually also were the most congested. And there were engineering and education and enforcement tools that we could use, and engineering in making sort of modest public improvements because we didn't have a lot of money. And in doing that, it usually sped things along. But congestion remains. I got this idea, I can't remember, at some conference I attended on the issue of congestion on freeways. And we started doing autopsies of freeway crashes. And that doesn't mean that just people who were killed, but just why they crashed, how much impact they had on the annual congestion. And we found out that 40% of the congestion had to do with crashes and people ogling the crashes in the other lane. That's why you've seen a lot of cities, the center divide now is getting higher because you end up having congestion on both directions, even though there's only a crash on one because everyone slows down to ogle. What we found out is that of the 40% of crashes, most of them were fender benders, and that people would sit with their car, usually in a travel lane of some sort, not get it off the road. This is just an example of, kind of homespun sort of transportation congestion improvement. And the insurance companies would tell them, you have to leave the car where it is, even with a fender bender. So we went to the legislature. It took 2 sessions to get them to pass legislation that the insurance companies could not require that in Oregon. And in fact, people had to move unless there was some sort of life safety issue, they have to move their cars out of the travel lane. It improved congestion by a decent percentage at virtually no cost. It was much safer for the folks that were in those fender benders to be out of a travel lane. So that's congestion, I would say. And I talked a little bit about safety. I would say that access to transit, the cost of transit up until the pandemic was an issue that I would hear complaints about during my years in Washington, D.C. And that's why I think we just need to reimagine what it means to provide people, based on their ability to pay. And Vera Katz, some of you might wonder if I pursued fareless transit. I did not, because I was mayor during the worst recession since the current one, and we just didn't have, and TriMet didn't have the resources. I like that idea, Mayor Vera Katz. We analyzed that back in the 90s, and we couldn't get political support to make it work. But things are changing. So I hope that answered a few of your questions, Michael.
Yeah, but there was also Fairless Square. I remember Fairless Square being very important growing up, which is not the case anymore. And I'm sure things have changed quite a bit in the transit world in this pandemic. So we shall see from there. Thank you.
I had to trade Fairless Square, which there were votes on council to get rid of it anyway, for the student bus passes.
That's right.
So that's what I had to do to get free student annual transit passes, not bus passes, for high school students.
Which, as a high school student, I don't know. I think I might have benefited from that too.
You automatically get them, so I hope so.
Yeah. Megan, I see your hand has been up for a while. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would, please.
Hi,
So
Megan.
thank you. Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thank you for coming to speak with us. I appreciate what you said about how transportation needs to be focused on the individual and the community. But I guess I have like a few little questions here. Like, what are ways to get the community involved in their own transportation needs? I often hear of meetings where people are invited to voice their opinions and they don't. Then when the transportation project is said and done, there's like outrage as if no one ever knew about it. Like, how do you remedy that? And then what do you say to those people who are more concerned with congestion and their right to the road when they complain about improvements for biking and pedestrian safety?
Wow, two great questions. What I did was, again, controversial, is I experienced that same frustration. City staff, Portland has amazing transportation staff and amazing transportation consultants and neighborhood involvement folks, just superb. But they would spend a lot of time going to the regular meetings, hosting meetings, and absolutely experience what you just said. So what we started to do, and that was another type of complaint that we would hear a lot, that when I was in the mayor's office. So what we started to do is send out a mailer to every house. That was a survey, and it gave them the opportunity to fill it out and be kept but anonymously, but also they had a card they could send in if they want to be kept apprised of a particular task. We also, so as an invite to a meeting to every household in as many different languages that we could fit on, whatever we could afford. And if they couldn't do that, there was a survey they could fill out and postage paid, mail it in, and then be kept apprised of projects. Because I really wanted to eliminate because I wanted us to do good work. And if we're not reaching people, it's not good work. We would also, on some of the projects, depending on what they were, we would also spend money on public opinion surveys. But I also thought it was really important I'm an experiential learner, so I sort of lead with that. So we would ask focus groups at random to go on walks with us. Like Northwest 23rd. We were getting a lot of complaints. People were getting hit on Northwest 23rd. And they wanted crosswalks. And forgive me, I'm not going to beat up on transportation engineers, but the traffic engineers said, no, that would make them more dangerous. And there are situations where putting in a crosswalk, as you all probably suspect, can do good, or it can give you a false sense of security that you shouldn't have. You should be very aware on some of these streets. But we took the transportation engineering team with the neighborhood team, myself, and spent time going up and down 23rd. And then we put in one crosswalk just to see what would happen. And what the transportation traffic engineer sort of realized was that when you have that kind of a situation, hemmed in, parking on both sides, just two ways, not like 82nd or 122nd. And we did the test, that people slowed down at those crosswalks. And now 23rd has crosswalks. I'm just giving you a sense of, this is a fascinating topic because the context is always important for every issue. But then we had some people down on 13th, the street without sidewalks in Northwest, that wanted us to paint in crosswalks. And in this particular case, we did the same kind of approach. We also sent postcards out to everyone around. We sent people to walk and knock on the doors on the streets. And what we found there when we did a test crosswalk is it did not make things better. That 13th works because everyone feels vulnerable enough. The key there is the automobile driver feels very vulnerable because there aren't markings. So it's actually one of the safest, sort of modestly busy streets in the city of Portland, with the exception of 3 interchanges with very busy streets where we put in lights. And that seemed to work. And then the second question was,
what do you say to those people that are more worried about their right to the road and they get upset about congestion, especially like if, I don't know if you've been around like Gleason lately out in the outer Northeast and 102nd, they've been changed into 1-lane roads with very prominent bike lanes, but people are very upset about that because it creates more congestion.
well, I'm gonna defend PBOT on this one because they did send out the surveys. They did send people walking door to door. I don't think they did mail-in surveys. I mean, they had lots of meetings. So I'm going to defend them on this one because I know the details of that project because I was getting calls about it, and I know some people there, and I saw what they did, and I'm like, this is very robust. This is really impressive. And the throughput, which is what everyone gets mad about if they're in the car, the throughput, it was impacted during a very small window of morning and evening, and the impact was in seconds. Meanwhile, it was also more consistent because they put in more lights. So the reason why the impact wasn't so, terrible for automobile drivers, when you put in more lights and do these other things, you can keep the traffic going. You don't have the starts and the racing between untrafficked light intersections. So I think they did a good job out there, and I understand and respect that people are mad, and they should continue at it to see if there's always going to be a certain amount of unintended consequences. So I don't think anyone can be cocky that we nailed it. So they should keep sort of on it. But I think from everything I've seen and heard, I think they did a great job, and I think it's working out well. I think there are probably some tweaks, but they should do the tweaks.
Yeah, I agree with it 100%. I just hear a lot of complaining about they shouldn't have done that from other people that, that either live in the area or drive through that area. So.
And I would have to believe that a fair number of them are the drive through the area to the outer reaches of the city. And their constituents too. You can't make everybody happy, that's for sure.
No doubt. Thank you for answering my questions.
Yeah, you bet.
That is for sure. That is for sure. So we really just have like another 10 minutes left with you, but we have more questions than we have time. So
I'll give quick answers. Yes, no.
Okay. Okay. No, I love the answers because you really dive into it and you're very eloquent. So I love it. And I think I've learned so much more about Portland and why Portland is the way it is. But I have to say that I do in the profession, the engineering profession, but I work in so many different spaces and I understand the intricacies.
You're not the stereotypical engineer in the best sense of that phrase. Yeah, you are absolutely people focused, which is such a strong, to have those two together is rare.
It's hard, let me tell you. It's hard. But let me get to the next question because I think it's very important. I'm gonna read this from the chat room. Phil asked, Sam, could you talk about any frustrations you've had as mayor where the best policy solution was pretty obvious, but politically unfeasible or unaffordable? How do you work around that? And are there boundaries always shifting?
Wow, Phil, that is another great question. The short answer is yes, almost always. I generally, and my staff would tease me because I sort of have this step-by-step checklist, and even my staff back in DC and doing climate action research for WRI. It's like, do your homework. It's really basically do your homework, spend lots of time with people with lived experience, expose them to their lived experience to sort of the data, which both have pluses and minuses, and come up with policy, start out with a point of view and an opinion, but be really clear you're there and absolutely, at best days, absolutely like, I know we can do better than what I'm talking about. and invite people to that discussion. And most people find it engaging and interesting. And if they don't get stuff they want, but in terms of, at least they feel like they had some influence, and listening to folks who passionately oppose something is really important, because if there are some things you can do to address some of their concerns, I try. But if I know that I'm not going to get what I want, then I try to make incremental progress, or try to set the foundation for something, someone to do it when times are better. Spending a lot of time outside of your office is key. And if you know you're going to be working on Gleason or wherever, in a year or so, spending lots of time to get those relationships solid is really important. But I'll make compromises on getting something as opposed to nothing. Sometimes I've been big-footed, which means that I was trying to do one thing, but the council said no. One that comes to mind is, I wanted out of the JTTF, which is not a transportation issue, but the council wanted to stay in. So I had to sort of come up with a hybrid. Otherwise, Portland would have been back in it, which eventually Hales put Portland back in it. And now Commissioner Hardesty and others have taken us out, which is good. On transportation, they were pretty deferential because they didn't want no one on council wanted it. They knew of the challenges at that time around funding. And so they are pretty deferential. And actually more than that, they were supportive. So when we did that study around the 25 most dangerous places in the city, I asked for $8 million of general fund, which transportation doesn't get. And we got it. And we continued to get it because we were cutting gas tax revenues were going down. What is something that I absolutely lost in transportation? I wanted to reuse the Savi Island Bridge to finally build, to reuse it over the I-405 on the Flanders Street connection. West Burnside is one of the most dangerous places in the city, even though it's an affluent place. And I wanted to reuse the bridge. It'd be cost effective. And the council just said, no frickin' way are you going to do that. And that's an example. I had others, but that's a really all over the newspapers, slap back. And sometimes you just wait for a better day. I think they'll be building the Flanders Bike Bridge soon.
Awesome answer. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Should mute myself first. Byron, I'm going to take a question from you. Your hand has been raised for a while.
My question, nice to see you again, Sam, is the bike plan seems to have stagnated. What do you think went wrong with that?
To be blunt, well, first off, there's a number of us in the United States, mayors and transport, like Sadiq Khan in New York, push for a good 10 years on biking. And there was at a certain point sort of a backlash to that. Portland had that. It was not unique to Portland. But our approach of, making things better, not just for bikes, but for all mode users, and valuing the trip not having to been taken as the highest sort of valued trip / non-trip. I don't mean to sound critical of my successors, but I honestly don't know. If you're not willing to take some heat for it, and you're not willing to take an ecumenical approach and making improvements for everybody, When I sat down with my successors and just offering my thoughts, I would just remind them that if all they spent money on were traffic lights, City of Portland has probably, this is a made up number, but probably has 60% fewer traffic lights than it should. And it shows up in all the speeding between the few that we have. Think of East Broadway, think of any major street in East Portland. That helps everybody. That keeps the cars moving without having to stop, which is what automobile drivers want most. That means it can anticipate the cross traffic for bikes on these bike lanes that cross very fast streets like Cesar Chavez Boulevard, and do it in a way that is least disruptive. It means modernizing traffic lights. So traffic lights, people don't necessarily know this, but traffic lights are the win-win-win. Good for climate, good for safety, good to keep things moving. I put as much money as I thought was smart and good. I put a lot more money than they had in the past into new traffic lights and more traffic lights, but we need a lot more. And all over the place. So those are there are other win-wins out there. You know, so even if you're not a big bike advocate or a pedestrian advocate or transit advocate like I am, you can still do things that speak to your own constituency if it happens to be automobiles, and get the 2-fers, 3-fers, and 4-fers at the same time. Traffic lights are just one example. There are more.
Oh, but they're so expensive. That is true. They are very, very expensive. So sometimes it's a competition between traffic lights and roundabouts, but we can have that talk later. You know what I'm going to do is that I'm actually going to take one last question, and I'm curious about this one last one because we are close to 8 o'clock, and I want to respect Sam's time and everyone else's time because we also have the second hour and talking about projects and such. But I like Riley's question in the chat. I know there's so many others. I apologize, we can't get to them all, but Sam will come back at some point, and
Sure.
I'll invite him back for your project presentation. But Riley asked a question, what cities would you consider to be Portland's peer cities in regards to transportation and looking forward with city planning?
Peer cities, as I'm going to assume that these are cities. There are a couple of ways to answer that question. So the peer cities in terms of typology and size and everything else. I mean, there are lists online, but there are cities like Austin and Sacramento more and more, Boise at the sort of smaller end. In terms of cities that I think are doing a great job, Washington, D.C. is kicking butt. Wow. They really, because when you're in the jobs I've had, the city I've been to more besides Portland in my life has been Washington, D.C. And from 25 years ago to now, I mean, it is has better biking and pedestrian access now than I think Portland does. And just is much more willing to be creative in making it work better for all modes, especially vulnerable modes. I also, spoke before the pandemic at Malmö in Sweden, and it's about the size of Portland, where if you get to Stockholm and those older sort of cities, Malmö is a relative, as Europe goes, a relatively young city. And so they have to face similar problems in a city kind of like ours. Rochester has really moved fast on a lot of this stuff, and much worse weather than we have, hotter, sweatier, and colder. But Portland has lost its, what should matter is how we feel about Portland. But in terms of comparing Portland, and it kind of breaks my heart, Portland has lost its mojo. It really has. On sort of mobility innovation. I'm passionately supportive of this Metro bond measure because it sort of takes care of some basics, but it's remedial and it's necessary. Think we should do it. Light rail is a good part of it. The other stuff is much needed, but we've lost our mojo. So I'm glad you're in this class and help us get our mojo back.
And maybe it's not streetcar anymore, right?
You know, I am mode agnostic. I'm mode agnostic when it comes to, I mean, my WRI, we worked a lot around the world on bus rapid transit, as you know.
Yep. Wow, that was fascinating. Thank you so much for
my
being
pleasure.
here. Thank you for sharing.
I love this class. I'm glad I'm glad it's so big. That's awesome.
I had to cap the class actually at 30.
I hear it's the professor. I hear that's the reason it's so big.
Oh, well, you know, it's only my second year running of this class. But I wanted to share with you, this is the 30th year anniversary. Can you believe that?
That's great.
And we're so happy, very, very honored to have you. I'm so lucky I ran into you and met you when you actually were able to meet in person.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. And you can, if you have other questions or ideas, or if I can help in any way, I'm at sam@samadamspdx.com, or just look for samadamspdx.com. You'll see my blog and my contact information. So thank you very much.
Good night, Sam.
Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Wow. It was pretty awesome. You guys were great. Wonderful questions. There were so many I couldn't even, so great. I'm gonna save them. They're all in the chat. There's some that didn't get answered. But let's break, because that was a really good, I think a very good fulfilling hour with Sam. But let's break and then we'll return back and we'll talk about the class project and the scavenger hunt. And I've also invited Caroline Cripps from last year's class, and she's going to talk about her project and her experience with the class. So let's do a 10-minute break, and well, it's probably going to be 7 minutes now, but let's return back at 7:10 so we have enough time to cover everything. So I thought that was really great. Thank you. Okay, so let's come back at 8:10. And Molly, can you load up Caroline's presentation?
Yeah, sure. It's ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you. We are at 8:10, so I do want to get started. And we had quite an hour spent with Sam Adams. So kind of a good little bit of a break before we return back to our class. I've invited Caroline Cripps, that's how you say your last name, an alumni from last year, to come share her project and her experience, and also the trajectory of where this class led her to where she is now. So it's kind of interesting. So I'll hand it over to Caroline. Caroline also has a few slides, so we'll bring those up as well. Yeah, so I'll hand you the mic, figuratively.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks, Tui, and thank you, Tui and Michael, for having me. This will be a little bit less probably intense than your last talk, but you know, I'm really hoping to give y'all like insight into group projects, or you know, honestly just kind of show you in like the next 10 minutes what I worked on, what my focus was. I'm now a first-year MERT program student, which is the Portland State University's Master's in Urban Regional Planning. And you know, I took Tui's class last year, and it really was like a bridge for me in getting back into academia and, you know, doing the master's program. So if you have any questions about that, I have my email at the end. Or feel free to like talk in the chat box. I'll like do my best to like look at the chat and the slides. But so kind of quickly, I focused my project on a street called North Fessenden Street. It's in North Portland, and it has a lot of interesting history and advocacy there. So I was really focused on that. So we can go ahead and go to the next one, the next slide. So this is the street. It's right in between St. John's and Portsmouth, and the chart on the right actually shows the areas of where there's been serious injuries from crashes, and the circle one is fatalities. So we can go ahead and go to the next one. And so you can see North Feston right there. It's surrounded by schools. So my focus with bringing like equity inclusion was that a lot of these schools are Title I schools, which means that they receive federal funding for having a lot of students from low income backgrounds. So, and I happen to have personal investment in the schools because I taught bicycle safety education at 2 of them. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah, so this is some of the headlines from the last 5 years. 13-year-old struck by a driver, another person hit and killed, 15-year-old hit. Yeah, it was tragic. Like a ton of like middle school kids were getting hit crossing the street. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to the next one. So the North Fessenden is kind of famous up in North Portland because it essentially got turned into a truck route. So on the left is the like what the trucks were supposed to do, you know, avoid that area. But of course, it's like super not efficient. Who wants to do that? So what they ended up doing was the right side, which is where trucks are going through North Fessenden Street. So let's go ahead and come to the next one. So the truck strategy plan, if you have any great memes, I highly encourage you to use them in your slides. I think they're hilarious. So the truck strategy plan was number one about, the truck strategy plan was created in 2012, I believe, I'm a little dusty, but 2012. And it was aimed at, you know, fixing this problem of trucks cutting through that area. So the number one thing was about improving the design freight route. And the number two thing was about traffic calming and safety improvements. And that annoyed me because why is the first thing we're prioritizing freight going as fast as possible from point A to point B? I get it, it's part of the economy, it's necessary. But as somebody that's about like bike and pedestrian advocacy and kids getting home safe, why the hell is that like second to be prioritized? Let's go ahead and go to the next thing. So this is Citizens for a Safe and Attractive North Fessenden Street, credible advocacy group. They're still on Facebook. They are really spearheaded this this cause, and actually the creator of this group took this same class that Tui's teaching about 10 years ago. So it was really fun. Her name's Donna. It was really great to meet up with her and kind of continue her work. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. So this is the improvements for North Fessenden going on right now. You can find these online. I would be happy to email them to you. Really great things. I wanted to include all the work that Donna's done to improve that street. So that's included here. And then I'm going to get into a really specific intersection that I think still needs improvements. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. Just improvements still happening. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. So for my project, I want to focus, get really specific on North Fessenden and North Wall, which you can see on the right. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So I propose adding green paint to the problem areas along the bike lane, adding bollard lighting on most of the crosswalks. I am not into huge like lighting coming down. It can cost a lot of money. It casts a lot of shadows when like actual bollard lighting that's about 3 feet high actually lights you from the side. Super good for kids, super good for bikes, and a little bit more affordable as well. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah, so this is the intersection. It's huge. So, you know, something even now like sidewalk bulbs, but painting that bike lane green increases visibility, and that kind of thing. Yeah. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. Yeah. Oh, let's go back one real quick. Sorry. And then, so this is a place where like that bollard lighting would be really great. And that's like not that hard for PBOT to do, right? I want to do something that was super accessible, something that could be low hanging fruit, you know, coming at it from this equity lens of like kids are getting hit, was really important to me. Last slide. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Cool. So some things that are important is that, you know, the neighborhood has been writing to PBOT, keep them writing, calling into 823 SAFE. You know, if you bug PBOT enough, they're going to do it. You just got to bug them a lot. I got the chance to meet with some really great traffic and transportation planners, and they all said it was a super feasible plan. I got the chance to email a couple of them. They said that, you know, they're building and designing plans for it. I wish it could happen overnight, but it'll probably happen in the next 6 months or so, which is still really exciting, right? So hopefully by the end of your class, you'll be able to go and see those like immediate changes. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you like a quick little example of what I worked on. I hope this was helpful. You know, I spent maybe 5 to 10 hours on the project, just to give you a time frame. You know, you don't have to spend 30, but you should definitely spend more than 3, right? So I hope this was helpful. My email is down below if you have any more questions or any other curiosities. I think I saw a question in the chat as well. Are these freight, so Carrie's asking, are these freight trucks? The freight trucks are taxed by WT mile, so it's almost always better for companies to use the shorter route, even if it can take longer. One reason why the freight will take I-5 to the Rose Quarter rather than 405. Carrie, does the tax incentive outweigh the revenue incentive? So they are freight trucks. They were freight trucks cutting through. Yeah, I do understand why freights, you know, are prioritized in that way. Do I think it's annoying? Yes. But
I just started to unmute because
Sure.
I saw that Phil put something in there too after, you know, well, Phil, that's the big question, is there's a cost benefit. So at some point, the amount they get taxed, you know, there's a point where it makes more sense to pay less tax because your revenue is still high enough, even though it's taking it longer. But in this case, in the Fessenden, I didn't even know that. That's a beautiful chart, Carolyn, that just looking at how it's got to be both a time and a distance saving. So it's kind of a no-brainer when you look at how we incentivize the freight through there.
Totally, yeah. Oh, cool. Well, yeah, I hope this was helpful again. Feel free to email me if you have any other questions. And Tui, Michael, thank you again for having me. Really enjoyed your class.
Thanks for coming by. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for coming. I know you have another class and you have another commitment at this time, so I really appreciate your time. But yeah, I can reshare Caroline's email. She was one of my STAR students, still very much involved and really want to be here with the students and share her project.
Oh,
and it
cool.
looks like she is frozen.
Oh, I am?
Oh, no, you're not. You just
Okay,
kinda
good.
froze.
Oh, that's always embarrassing. You never want it frozen on like a funny face. So.
No, I'm sorry. You look like you're frozen, but you're not.
Oh, it's hard. Like
You're just really good at being very still.
Yeah, let's look up
That was
miming.
really good. You know, I wanted to bring up something. I have a really good colleague of mine who also works for PBOT, Francesca Jones, Michael. And Francesca is working on the Freight Master Plan. And we did a call just last couple days ago, and she's interested in coming to this class to talk about the Freight Master Plan. And I think Caroline's project and where we are in the world with a lot of this supply, delivery, and demand and COVID, and the tax incentives actually plays a big part on how freight moves around our city. So I think your research actually is really awesome, Caroline, in that it could so very much carry forth into how we plan our city and how do we incorporate freight along with all the other modes. So great question, Carrie. And also, thank you, Caroline. I know there's one more question. I don't know if you want to address it or not, but maybe really quickly, since I know you need to get off, but Phil had asked, does the tax incentives outweigh the revenue incentives? It seems like the shorter trip would result in more total trips depending on how drivers are paid. I don't know that answer.
I don't know that answer either. I don't even understand the question, to be honest, but I'm sure it's a good question. You know, does the tax incentive outweigh the revenue incentive? I didn't really come at mine from like an economic perspective, but that might be something really cool to include in your project. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna hop off.
Okay, thank you.
My email in the bottom, and thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Totally. Okay. Bye. Have fun. Enjoy the class.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a lot of pressure because everybody talks about how wonderful this class is. Now we just have to like produce a really cool project to show everybody.
And I hope you'll have a good class. It's so fun. It's great, I'm sure. Okay.
It's fun in person as it is online. I'm looking forward to Thursday nights, really. All of a sudden, like, snap, we're here again. But this brings us to our project. And before class started, I think right at 6 o'clock, I had sent an email to everybody to talk about where we are with our the guidelines for the project. But before that, I also recognized that I did a double homework assignment. So homework number 2 would be okay if you send it before class tomorrow. I mean, next week. But in terms of the project, if you want to bring up the your email, if you can, or even the project is the email that I sent earlier about the class project. I'd rather do that versus a screen share because I'm going to share this another screen share for Molly when she talks about the scavenger hunt game. But within the class project, the assignment that will be a good milestone for next week due to me, if you can email me and Molly, Michael, I don't know if you want to be in this email or not, about what their class projects are.
That's okay. You can leave me off of that. I have lots of emails. Thanks.
But if you could email me and Molly by the start of next week's class of what your project is. Molly's going to help me put together the list of projects and a database to keep track of what your projects will be. But in the assignment, as I had emailed, makes it easier. I had listed what the class, what the project is. And the question that, what was really popular about this course was to learn about how you advocate for certain things within your neighborhood, or that also you see as a benefit. As this class has morphed into a more community-based class, still an individual project. I think it's harder to do a community project at this point because we're still on Zoom until I figure out something for next year. But each person over the last few years have really wanted to be a part of this project, this class, also because they had like a passion project. And that project could very well be a very big theoretical, how do you vouch for medical transportation, which was my project in the past, or to how do you improve this little sidewalk or this intersection. So think in your head as to what types of projects you would like to work on. Some of these projects have been implemented, like we shared last week, is that they've actually had passed through council and have been played out within some of the streets in the city of Portland. So it's very interesting. But each week, we've also, we're on week 2. So next week is week 3. And I also, for your convenience, I've put the date. So next week is October 15th. So what would be due to me and Molly next week via email so we can catalog all this, is define what type of transportation issues you would like to address. What do you see is a concern within your community, or a more hypothetical outside of like a physical space? What do you feel like is really, really important? Some of these projects are very amazing, some really passion projects. Some of them like were really kind of heart-wrenching last year. I remember listening to them. But transportation plays such a big deal to everybody, and that's a big part of why we're here. So think about it, go through this, marinate the ideas of what you want, and then email to me and Molly by noon of next week. And so each week we'll do a check-in as to milestones in which the research should take place for your project. As Nathan had mentioned last week, and also Caroline, they did quite a bit of research, and they were able to reach out to some agencies and talk to them and have a conversation. And really, this is a gateway for you to have conversations with those already working in the industry. So yeah, read through this. These are some of the questions that I had laid out that would help you through your planning process. And ultimately, this project will be presented towards the end of class. I've slated 2 weeks of class, the last 2 weeks, so that most everybody will have an opportunity to present the project. And in the past, it's always been 3 minutes. And usually 3 minutes is all you get at City Council. So I'm gonna keep that 3 minute running, and we'll keep time. Last year was like a big race because we only had 1 week. So this this year we have 2 weeks. And one of the things I'm gonna do is at midweek, midterm, we will look at kind of a check-in to make sure if you're going in the right direction. And so we will also share time in which you can probably share among your classmates, your cohort, your ideas. Now I kind of want to make the space for that as well. So that's what we have for the project. Does anybody have any questions? I know we only
I just quickly want to say something. So this document that you just saw has already been placed in the Google folder for class project, and all of you have access to that. So you can also download that for your reference and read it.
Yeah. And the only thing I didn't put in there was to email Molly, but you should also CC her on this so she can help me through cataloging all your projects. So do you have any immediate questions? Because I can also answer them during the week. Because I really do also want to roll out the scavenger hunt game, which I think is going to be really fun. And that'll be the part of the class in lieu of a dim sum field trip that we're not going to have. So read through the project. Let me know if you have any questions. Totally email me. But Molly, the scavenger hunt is all yours. This is gonna be fun.
Hi, everyone. So we have scavenger hunt, which is also going to be about 15% of your grades for the entire course. And it's supposed to be something very interesting. It's more about the different modes of transportation available in Portland. And we just want to learn how people perceive different neighborhoods. So I'll quickly go through the rules and regulations for everybody. Portland has been divided into different neighborhoods, and the major rule of the game is that every student must select 6 neighborhoods in Portland. And your choice can depend on where you live or just any other area that you generally like or find interesting. And I have placed a picture of Portland with all the different neighborhoods, which gives you an idea. So you can choose 6 out of those. Then after that, students must photograph the use of each mode of transportation in different neighborhoods, and also with the intent of filling the maximum number of grids. So this will be clearer when you see the next slide, where actually the grids are present. And each student must have a maximum limit of 5 photographs per week. Behind each photo that you collect, you can also have some certain observations of the place and why did you actually to that neighborhood, why were you drawn to that particular location. Also, the most exciting part of the scavenger hunt are the prizes, and we are thinking of choosing not one but maybe 2 or 3 winners at the end of the course, and we have some exciting gift cards for you which we plan to mail to your address after the winner has been chosen. And also, of course, needless to say, it's a fun and informative exercise. And we just want everybody to get out there and see different neighborhoods from a new perspective and to share their ideas with everybody. But if you come to activity, then please don't feel like you're forced to do something. These are the different neighborhoods that Portland has been divided into. For example, the Forest Park and Northwest Hills, and also neighborhoods in the Southeast. So feel free to choose any 6 neighborhoods that you like. And finally, this is the grid that I was talking about. So I'm sure things are clearer now. On the left side, you have the option of different neighborhoods. And again, this presentation is available in the Google folder named Scavenger Hunt. So you can just download this presentation and then you can start editing it. And every person needs to edit their individual presentation. And on the bottom left side of the slide, you need to write your name so that we know who is editing which presentation. And then as we proceed throughout the course of this class, just feel free to add your particular photographs. For example, if you've chosen Alberta, which is your neighborhood A, and you traveled there using an e-bike, so maybe you can take a picture of doing that activity, or even if you see somebody else doing that there, and then you can place it in this grid and so on. So Tui, would you like to add something to this, or Michael?
I think you explained it pretty well. There's also a spot underneath where you put your name. You can't really see it because we're on Zoom. But once you get onto the Google Drive, you can take a look at it. Or if you're not able to get on it, go ahead and let me know. I can email this out to you. One of the things, oh, and if you need to get this printed, the library, the Monroe County Library, you can print for free. It looks like Julie has her hand raised. So yes.
Yeah, I was just confused. That neighborhood map made me laugh because I've never seen. It's not what I would think of as being the neighborhoods that I know in Portland. So, is this the map you want us to use, or should I use like my other understanding of what Portland neighborhoods are? Question mark.
You can totally share that.
Yeah, you can definitely choose your own.
Okay,
yeah, you can definitely choose your own.
This just seems like much bigger, which is maybe exciting, but I don't know. I was just surprised by that map.
I should probably have included the source report. It's called the State of Housing in Portland. And this is the map that the State of Housing report has come up with when they perceive Portland. So you can go there and read more about how they divided the city into these neighborhoods. But of course, you can choose whatever you like.
Julie, do you want to share with us that map when you get the chance? Feel free to share it to the group because we can do any, I mean, this is really open. This is really your class. So we're not really tied to just this map, but it's really just a way for you to get out into the neighborhood and your community, and also look at different types of modes and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you
Yeah.
can definitely get more specific. Those are really broad areas on that map, but it was actually me who said, I think a simplified map would probably come through Zoom a little better so people weren't like squinting too much. But please, by all means, do, dive in and you can get more specific on what neighborhood you went to.
So Megan has what other maps are available? So yeah, we can share other maps. You can feel free to choose your own, Davisa. So Megan has a question. She says 5 photographs per week. Does that mean per neighborhood, or does that mean for work? How do you access the folders for this class? I think I only have figured out access for my own folder.
The scavenger hunt folder will be shared with you tonight because we just launched it. So that folder has not been shared with you, but I'll be receiving this soon. And then you can just download the presentation from there and you can start working on it.
Actually, Malsri, could you share the entire folder to all the students and not just their folder? If you go back to the, we can talk this internally, but also I've put a lot of the presentations, guest presentations and homework assignments. So let's go ahead and share the parent folder to everybody so everyone has access to it.
Yeah, all those have already been shared, not just the individual folders, but everything containing the syllabus and the guest presentations, all that has been shared with everybody in the class.
Okay, that's what I thought. Let us know if you have any difficulties.
And as for the question of like the 5 photographs per week, that's just the maximum limit. You don't have to. That's if you want to, you can go up until 5 photographs every week. You can also do 1 or 2 if you're comfortable with that. And it can be totally random. For example, if you chose 3 photographs, they don't have to be of the same neighborhood or of all of different neighborhoods. It can be anything that you want.
Yeah, and it's five max total, not just per neighborhood. So does that answer your question for that? We're still working on categories for like the winners. So we're thinking one of it will be a blackout if you're to cover all your neighborhoods and cover all that. So a blackout. Another one would be probably kind of subjective, and it'll be me and Molly that will look at this as the most creative solution, or a photograph, and the other would be like, where did you travel farthest from where you live? It's still kind of hard to measure, but we're still working that detail out as we're doing this.
Oh, and I forgot to mention one thing. It would be great if you could go out now during this term to take pictures. But if you have any other photo from this year that you took in 2020 of any neighborhood using any particular mode, you're also to add those pictures, as long as they are from this year and not like really old. So you can also do that.
Okay, awesome. Carrie has a question. I know we're at time, but I also said I'll stay on for a few minutes after class just to answer some questions if it's project related and scavenger hunt related. So Carrie?
My question was answered. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Yeah. So we were actually really good at 8:40. So like I said, I'll stay on for a few minutes because I know we should close. I really would like to, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, because it's in your own home and in the evening. But I think Julie had you said that you have some ideas and you're gonna run it by me. Do you want to chat offline, or you can go ahead?
We can chat after, or I could email. I just wasn't sure if, like, with 30 students, if it was annoying if you had people say like, oh, I have these 2 ideas or 3 ideas. Is that okay? Because I understand in your position, then that's 30 emails to you and to Malshri, and that's just a lot. So
Well, we kind of signed up to do this, so I'm totally fine with it. So no, go ahead and email us. Totally fine. And we've dealt with more than 30 emails because I think this is it. But let's end for the night because it has been a really wonderful evening. I think it's very well spent. But I want to give you all your evening back so we can Zoom again tomorrow on other projects and other work, resume our life. Okay, so thank you. I think it was a wonderful night. Again, we'll see you next week.